Back with another episode of SemiPr0, this time joined by interviewer, host, and I would say broadcast staple of both CSGO and VALORANT spaces. It's Banks, James Banks. He's here to shed some light on his style and his process as a desk host, and of course, his some of the stuff he's been up to a little bit later that haven't been related to the desk is a bit more related to something like team management and branching out as time goes on. So we're gonna cover it all here. And one of the things that I wanted to start us off with is how you actually intro the audience into a show, because that's a space where I'm definitely critical of my own self when it comes to introducing topics and like getting into initial things. I think the meat of things, it's much easier when you've already said your early piece, when you've kind of fulfilled the role of a host of a show, right? And even in this case, right, I'm walking everybody through like, here's why you're here. Here's why we're here to bring you this sort of content. Once I get that sort of premise out of the way, I feel like it's a lot easier for me personally to just jump into the rest and flow and go with the flow as things proceed. So I was curious how you've has that been an issue for you in the past? Have you, how do you respond to when you're tasked with opening up the show? Like, for example, the Blast Global Finals that happened very recently, you were the one who was introducing people as soon as all of the fancy scorecards and stuff were taken care of. You were the voice that had to greet everybody who was watching in apprehension, waiting for those games. It's a big stage, it's a big pressure, even though it's obviously online, so there's nobody in the like live audience, so to speak. But I mean, even in then, that must have also been a bit nerve-wracking, maybe in your earlier stages, or maybe not. Maybe you're somebody who's just cool under pressure. So how do you tackle the introduction of a show in general?
I think for when it comes to like introducing a show, it depends on the level of event, right? Because you don't want to deliver too much hype for, say, a smaller event. Not that it doesn't deserve it, but it also has to be well thought out because you have to be realistic to the viewers. I always look at it as like setting expectations. So even when you start off on a group stage, right, it's a slower level of hype into it. You kind of set the scene of, I don't know, maybe they're coming off a player break, where we are with the teams. But also you want the viewers to feel vested in what you're doing, right? You want to feel like they've been a part of something. For the global finals, what you mentioned in particular, this has been obviously a year-long story, so you need to bring a whole different level of hype of it. The way I do it is like, I first of all speak to the guys that I've got on the desk with me and see if we're all aligned on like what we want to talk about or where the main focus points are. Because just because Maniac says something, Pimp may not agree directly with that. And we often have like a meeting, and this is what Blast do really well. We have a meeting with the producer as well to kind of discuss it. But then what I do is I write out like a script, but I don't read the script and I put it in bullet points. So I write what I think I would want to say, but you're never going to be able to look down, see it, remember it, especially if it's like a whole monologue. Like the monologue I did for the global finals last day, so the championship Sunday. Like people are like, oh, did you write that down? I'm like, well, I had the bullet points for what I wanted on all the key parts that I want to touch on. And then I just kind of free flow from there because you want it to be natural. And that's another thing. If you're just like reading from an auto cue, and we actually had people. So there's people that work for like Sky, for example. I do a show on Jinx TV where it's all about Counter-Strike. And these guys were like, oh, do you need a teleprompter? And I'm like, oh, I've never had a teleprompter in my life. We've never done that. And he's like, oh, all of our presenters have teleprompters. I'm like, yeah, I don't need that. Like, this is what we live and breathe and we do. And I feel like teleprompters, okay, people can make it sound good. That's the job of the host at the time. But I think that makes you too restricted, right? And I want to be able to be as open as possible. Okay, if you stumble over a word or whatever, or you mess something up or it doesn't go exactly to plan, it can happen to anyone. But I think it becomes off more authentic and the viewers buy into it. So I like to kind of set the tone. I like to build it up, and then I like to open it up to everyone and kind of go from there. But my key thing is just playing off the bullet points. And as long as I've looked at them beforehand to have a look down, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm touching on. And you try and nail as many of them as possible, and also make sure that it's worthy of what you're giving it to the viewers, because there might be a game that's an elimination match, right? And you really got to set that as it's not just hype, but it's also scary at the same time. So you're kind of the storyteller from start to finish on it.
Yeah, that's a super interesting point about the teleprompter side of things. And one thing that I've heard a lot about, there's this perpetual push and pull in esports about how much should we be taking from other fields? How much should we be taking from television or professional sports broadcasting? And how much of it has come up in the grassroots and developed organically that we should actually take as an advantage over those other mediums? So one of the follow-up questions I would have then is, how do you like essentially, do you have a certain sort of inspiration of style, or even like a specific element of how a show is put together that you think is informed by some of these other broadcasts? Or in your mind, do you think that most of it has come actually instead from just working so many esports events? Because I imagine somebody like yourself who's just worked so many events at this point and also in so many different roles down the years, you must have built up your own sort of style or your own sort of process for developing your own voice on the broadcast itself, that maybe you don't even need a lot of the same things like the teleprompters, for example, that a more conventional broadcast from a TV source might sort of leverage as a tool for their advantage. So how do you characterize your own style in that sense? And have you been inspired or taken some sort of inspiration from those more professionalized sources, or do you think that it's all about like that grassroots space in general?
I'm more towards grassroots on it, but I think you always have to look outside the box, right? So for me, two of the best hosts we have in the entire scene is when you look at like Machine or you look at Shocks, for example. Those two are on a whole other level, and they're the ones I'm inspired by when I look at the industry standards for it. But then when it comes across to looking at real sports, I take a lot of it from like boxing and MMA and like UFC, that kind of it, because that for me is like a personal interest. Like I look at football as an example. Like, okay, I understand it, I watch it, but I mean, it's not something that I think is like groundbreaking or something I wanted to add to an esports variant. It was actually Sir Scoots who told me, he was like, always look at what's going on elsewhere rather than what we're doing in esports, because you can easily see what we're doing in esports and it's very good, but you can also add little bits to keep your still esports element and just add another layer on top of it. So for me, it's pretty simple. Like I have my style and my way of doing things. I look at what the best in class do, like I mentioned, Shocks and Machine there. But then you also try and say, okay, what can I do to even add a level to what they're doing? So it's not even really anything special, and that's just being honest. I think it also comes from, you need to have raw passion. I can really sense when a host or a commentator, because you don't often get analysts that don't have the passion because they're there because they do love that game, right? They know that game. But like, you can often tell when someone doesn't enjoy it. Like I once hosted for a FIFA tournament, and I was like, okay, not doing this because I wasn't happy with my own performance. I didn't want to ever do it again. And it's not to say that like, oh, if someone goes, oh, you can have this amount of money, you can do it. Like it wasn't about that for me. I've only ever worked on games I'm passionate about. Like I was doing PUBG for a while. I loved that game, but it slowed down and the game just didn't grow to be what it could have been, for example. But CS, I've been playing CS since 2003. I love this game. And I feel like you can get the sense of someone being really into it, and that also helps them deliver to this level that's needed to be authentic. And people buy into that more because we sadly see so many people that are like, I can do every game. And it's like, yeah, you may play the game, you may even try learn the game and speak to the right people. Okay, you can sound good, you can be charismatic while doing it, but when you don't have the passion for it, that is the most noticeable, and that's where you can kind of fall for the trap, I think, of some people just trying too hard to push something that's not real. So for me, it's all about authenticity with it, looking at the best and adding, I guess, sprinkle a little bit of salt on top of it with everything else.
It's interesting that you pivot so heavily around the idea of authenticity as well, because that's something that I
Mm.
feel does kind of, at least for me, I was never super big in the sports space, but when I watch those broadcasts or I listen to the commentators or the sort of Monday Night Football pregame shows and stuff like that,
Yeah.
that when I look at that, and obviously this is more of like an American example, but I just imagine that a large portion of them, I wonder if they are as genuinely invested as some of the people that I see on esports broadcasts are, particularly
Mm.
in the CS space, since, as you mentioned, people have just been playing and watching and consuming content related to this game for so long. Obviously, the same is true for American football, but maybe because of the fact that it's not as much of an industry, because it is still like propped up with, you know, some duct tape here and there, right? And because it
Yeah.
is a little bit more in that like grassroots scenario, which is a word that I keep repeating, of course. But that's something to me that really sells the essence of CS esports anyway, is the idea that like we've been here for so long, but we've never broken to such insane heights that there's a huge industry surrounding it. There is something of an
Mm.
industry with it, but to the degree that the people who are involved with that on like the high finance side are interacting with it, it hasn't completely, I guess, corrupted the essence of what it actually is. You still get that raw passion shining through at pretty much all levels, where
Yeah.
I feel like maybe there's something like that missing. And again, maybe it's my ignorance speaking more so, but in that professional sports environment where everybody's buttoned up and everybody's wearing suits and nobody's showing it even necessarily any like fashion sense or individual flair, then I feel like those broadcasts suffer from that. So has there been something that you've tried to push for in the CS broadcasting space, or in your short time so far with Valorant broadcasting? Have you tried to push for a certain style or something that maybe conflicts with that more buttoned up approach that you'd see more in the TV spaces or the TV broadcast? Or like have people been receptive to some ideas that you've had for that sort of thing, or have you found that there's actually a bit of pushback in that space?
I feel like we're really lucky in esports. We get a lot of freedom. Like, we don't really have a direct dress code. Like, for example, Blast will be like, okay, a jacket and a shirt minimum. But me and Maniac, we start going to these suit shops and then adding ties, and then my fiance helping us with like coordinating the colors and stuff. And we enjoy that. But I know there's a lot of people in esports who don't want to wear a suit and tie, right? They don't want to be in that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some people wear like crazy fashion stuff that I have no idea about because it personally doesn't interest me. But like getting suited up and feeling good before a broadcast, if you're feeling good in what you're wearing, then that's what matters, right? It doesn't really matter what we wear in that sense. I remember the early days of CS, and Foreign, for example, would be wearing a basketball jersey because
Yes.
that was like his signature go-to thing that he'd pull out. There's nothing wrong with that when the quality of work is still there. Now, as we grow, I'm sure there'll be a bit more of this push towards like being a certain level, for example, that like there's a minimum to make. And I think Blast do that in a degree. But I'm actually really comfortable in what we choose like that. No one asked us to wear ties. No one asked us to wear like three-piece suits, for example. But we enjoyed that, and we like it a lot. Semler actually is probably one of the commentators who's most known for it, alongside him and Yanko in the early days. They would go full suits before anyone would, and that's what I wanted to stay as. Like, it's our own choice, it's our own style. I'd say in terms of stylistic, especially in the work I do commentary wise in Valorant, I feel like me and my co-commentator Mitch, like me and him are just best friends outside of the game anyway, and we spend a lot of time together. We're now building the Alliance VALORANT team together, but we bring a lot more of the jokey style. We noticed very early on in Valorant that everyone was so keen to get involved in it and get on board that, yeah, they might have some good game knowledge and they're very good commentators, sure, but there was this synergy lacking. I think the only one that has a close regard to what me and Mitch have, and that it's kind of the ones we look up to, is Sean Gares and DDK in North America, because they both love the game. They're both completely invested and they can have a joke or two. But like me and Mitch, we just basically take our real life friendship into a bit of commentary, and we've never been pushed back. And actually, Mitch by Riot themselves was encouraged because I'm 6'4", I'm pretty big. Mitch is quite short. He's an Irish guy, so we make some jokes about his height a lot. And Riot said to him in one of the meetings that, oh, your brand has become your height being like mocked a little bit here. And he takes it. It's all good fun and banter, but it's like it's an element that the viewers can buy into a fun, because there are some points in the game where you don't just want commentary the whole time, right? You want to have a little bit of a downturn on a round where we know the other team's going to be on eco, and maybe it's quiet for the beginning 40 seconds or so. We can add a few little extra bits in there. And I also think that's something I don't want to ever go away. I don't want it to be forced on, like, you must just talk this way and commentate in this way. I think the beauty of what we have in esports is a lot of our own styles in dress, in conversation, in talking points. And some analysts are very much more focused on, oh, this is the set execute. Other analysts will be more on the numbers, for example. Everyone has to find their own way, but there is definitely no blueprint. Like, someone could tell me, oh, how do you go be an analyst, or how do you go be a commentator? You cannot copy people. There are commentators who have said to me in the past that they looked up to another commentator and they were focused on having that style, but they didn't find success until they had a bit of that style, but also brought their own flair to it. So for me, being unique is 100% required. And if you are just another copy and paste of someone else, or you're trying to be exactly like them, you're not going to probably find success because that person already exists. And we're not in a industry where you have to be a certain way. And that's actually really unique. That's something we should cherish, because we don't know how long that will last for.
Absolutely true. Yeah, the main issue is that you might see almost like the agents of doom already approaching, right? Where people are coming up and they're like, "Oh, maybe you should like."
We've had some people come in, right? I can go back to StarCraft days where they
Sure.
hired someone, and I believe he was a fantastic presenter from a TV channel and more experienced than probably anyone on the broadcast put together. And I was doing interviews in the crowd and then asking some players some questions as well. And it was just like, oh God, it was like, not only did he not check the game, but he didn't even like talk to the people around him. He just obviously thought he was so much better, and he'd come in his way and his style. And it's like, you can't ask these kind of questions. I remember an interviewer asking someone about, oh, what did you have for breakfast that like helped you be performing better? And I was like, Maybe if you were doing like a real sport, and honestly, there's people out there now, there's sports therapists and stuff that are in esports, and they'll say, "Oh, have a banana rather than a chocolate bar," right?
Yes.
That just makes perfect sense. But I mean, the guy did not win this tournament based on the breakfast he had, right? Like he may have had a better diet or been good and it gives you a percentage, but he won it because of X, Y, and Z. Like his team were better at this and they were fragging out higher, for example. And that at the time was when we started looking like, oh no, is it going to go this way? Are they going to start to give us these people who, first of all, don't care about our game and also then don't ask the right questions? But from all the tournament organizers, from its ESL or your DreamHacks or anyone basically, Blast, you can name them, they've still kept it grassroots and the talent coming up. The one thing I would like to see more done is, and this is a problem where we don't have like yearly contracts, for example. Like you're playing event to event, you're being hired, oh, you've got this event and these events. Sadly, we don't see the investment yet where it's like you have a voice coach or something like that. I know in League of Legends, they offer a lot of support to their talent, and that's huge. Like these guys get real training from professionals. That's where we can add more depth to us as the real esports guys coming up. And that's where I think there's the key aspects you want to see bridge the gap. But I don't think like an ESL or like a Blast is going to do that right now when they don't know if that talent's first of all even going to stay in the game, if they're going to use that talent for the whole time. So it needs to be a bit of give and take from both sides on who gives what, who allows what, and who takes it if we want to go further with it. But I personally would be like, if someone told me, especially this is where it's different as well because I'm older. I've done the traveling. I have a son. I have a fiance, and I'm very busy with like normal life stuff. That if someone told me, look, you're just working for us, and you just got this is your whole year season. These are the dates. I would love that. That would be heaven. But sadly, it's not really done unless you are on a League of Legends, which has its whole formats and stuff and how that works. But even them, some of them, I think it was Froskurin. She's gone freelance as well now, right? They're not under Riot, so it's all up in the air how this thing exactly is going to work. But for example, my cousin, he works on Sky TV doing football for Premiership, and he goes to the grounds and does like the matching reports for the Sky News part. He already knows exactly like this is the schedule, this is what's happening. Boom, done. And like that's one step I'd really want us to see a direction that like everyone can do. But I guess there's a lot more intricacies that maybe I'm not even aware about on how you would try and make that work because you would obviously be committed to someone. You couldn't do X, Y, and Z because of it. Some people prefer it, some people don't. But as a lot of us are getting older, I think a lot of us would be fine with just saying, okay, this is what we've got.
Yeah, and that's also it kind of speaks to a different kind of narrative when it comes to talent, where you have this perspective as at least myself as a mostly an outsider. Only recently did I get into the whole broadcast talent side of things as like a prospective aspiring talent. But even before that, I was following all of the different hearsay, I guess, where people would say stuff on talk shows or people would tweet some things out about what might be going on behind the scenes, behind the curtains about the hiring processes. And one of the things that kept coming up in a lot of these exchanges that I noticed is people have the perspective that the broadcast talent is like a young man's game or a young talent's game because of the fact that all of the people who are getting on in their years and they have a family, they're setting down roots, they can't afford, Anders, for example, he's not going to be without his family for too long. He's not going to be willing to travel as much as somebody who just come out and he's 21 years old or something and he's like ready to travel for however long and do however long days that you need done and all of those things. So if you have these other obligations and yet there's still like plenty of talent in theory coming up that the replacement theory comes into play, right? Where you're worried that you might end up getting replaced, and that seems to be, regardless of whether or not it's even a real thing, it does seem to be real insofar as the talent believe it's real, right? That's something that keeps coming up is there's that almost the FOMO or the fear of missing out and fear of being replaced, even if you just say no to one event. I mean, I remember hearing this some time ago on one of the By the Numbers when Moses joined, and he was talking about how he felt afraid, or maybe this was even a counterpoint where he was telling, like, he was the top of the line. He was in essence like one of the best, maybe in people's minds the best commentator that we had at the time. And insofar as his versatility, what he could bring to the desk, he could cast with pretty much anybody, and it felt natural. And that's something that feels irreplaceable from the outside, just as a fan watching that. But he felt like he was acutely replaceable at any point. Has this been something that you've struggled with yourself in general? Like, do you think that there's just a large number of people that are just waiting, chomping at the bit for the opportunity?
Yeah, we've seen exactly that, and the point you made about Moses is exactly spot on because I'm looking at it and people say to me, and this is what it baffles me. People are like, "Oh, you've made it. Like you can get any tier 1 event you want for Counter-Strike, for example." and it's just not the case.
Yeah.
Tournament organizers have their favorites. Tournament organizers also at times need to save money. There's no commitment yet for us to be like, oh, we've definitely got this event for the year. Like Blast, they got me all of last year. It's fantastic. I'm signed for most of this year as well. It's a real honor and privilege, but it's not like I know if next year and the year after is going to be exactly the same. And you've always got to stay at the top of your game, which is good. It's a motivating factor for sure, but that fear sometimes is so much to deal with. Like I remember times where I hadn't been contacted, say at the beginning of like a couple of years ago, I hadn't been contacted for a while about what was coming, and then all of a sudden you then don't get picked, and it's like even for some now, like I did a DreamHack not too long ago, but I hadn't done loads of DreamHacks before that. They've come, and now again this year, I'm not sure exactly what ones I'm working, what I'll be doing, and it's nothing bad on them because often they don't actually know the dates yet or the situation they're going to be in. But we're all in this kind of circle of, oh, when is this happening? Can I get it next? Or like, and you almost always have to fear that okay, if someone does come up and they're good and they're worth it, they'll get picked. But then also there's people that maybe are not so worth it, not so experienced, and it isn't like they're anything bad, but they come in and they've got a bit of potential, but they don't know. And we've seen this many times where a new talent might come in and they'll ask for something outrageously low compared to what their value is, but they don't know their value. And people talk about undercutting being a big problem. Undercutting is still a massive problem, but actually some of the undercutting done is like unintentional. They're not doing it on purpose because they're just not aware. Like it's not a publicly spoke about thing as maybe it should be in there. Like for me, I just always look at being as diverse as possible. Like I do interviews, I host, I can also commentate as well. My favorite thing to do is definitely host, but I've really enjoyed commentating Valorant because I have a great co-commentator to do it with. It's a weird one that we're always sat there. Like even this, the Valorant Championship tour that is now taking place, I was almost sure I'm going to do Europe. Me and Mitch, the community like us, players like us. We did First Strike as well. And then all of a sudden he gets picked and I don't get picked, and they'd like split the duo up. And you sit there and you're like, well, what's going on? Why is this happening? And the feeling, I cannot explain to anyone. It's just horrible because you feel like, okay, am I bad at this? And you get no feedback as well. Like
Of course, yeah.
many people will not be just saying the reason why. Like I can't just go and knock on Riot's door and say, oh, hey, what was the reason? Like, how can I improve on this? You just don't know. And that right now, like it's such a shit feeling, but it's something you just have to deal with in being here. And it's something we've all come to get to grasp with. And as you mentioned on the age point of view, it isn't so much like it's a young man's game, but as you get older, your priorities in life change.
Yes.
Like I can still travel, I can do all the things, but I also want to spend a bit more time doing X, Y, and Z. And if you say no to an event, so you get an offer and you really want to do it, but it just doesn't make sense, right? Like you might have something planned with family, or you might have a trip booked already elsewhere that you have, and then you go, oh, if I say no, will this hurt my chances? And I've had that before where I've said no, and then the TO never came back to me, like never asked me again. And you just like, great, I've just blown that. And it wasn't intentional. You weren't rude, but they feel like they're giving you something good, and then you say no. So they're just like, oh, leave this guy in the corner. So it's a really wild ride, and our job is amazing. I don't want to say like it's. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but there are many parts that are hard with it, and there are many parts that people don't look at because they see it as so glamorous and glorious. But you look at Henry, for example, when he left, his comments were very firm. Moses in a similar fashion as well. And what I'm trying to do is be multi Swiss Army knife, I guess, so I can do as much as possible so that there's always something coming, because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, especially during these crazy COVID times.
Oh, absolutely. And that segues very nicely into the next point that I had, which was, of course, related to these crazy COVID times. You have to wonder. One of the things that was, especially when it was more like fresh, when it had just started, and like in the early months, we had been able to pivot directly into online only in CS space. Obviously, Valorant as well had to do some similar things. And one of the things I found quite humorous in a sort of like cynical way is that a lot of organizations, be they team orgs or tournament orgs, were essentially saying stuff akin to like, oh, look, woe are we? We have no resources to do like the things that we want to do. That's why you see like Chaos signing all their crazy sponsorships and then dropping their team, obviously. And now a lot of their players have had to move over to Valorant. That's a case where like, there are some obvious cases that it doesn't really add up, because in theory your costs are lower because everybody's locked down and staying in and you've had to make some concessions on the broadcast side in terms of quality for sure. But you know, in theory, there's got to be some push and pull. Despite all of the misgivings, despite all of the issues that have cropped up as a result, or in the wake of COVID, one of the things that I do appreciate about the esports scene compared to a lot of the traditional sports stuff is that we could instantly pivot. And like, you know, it was happening in the middle of, for example, Flashpoint 1, and they were still able to get everybody set up. The games could still go on somewhat on schedule, you know, very, very minor delays. I think the same was true for a lot of the ESL stuff as well in the moment. And despite the fact that a lot of things were thrown into chaos, we still were able to recover a lot faster than a lot of the traditional sports, which had to be delayed or completely, you know, canceled in some cases for maybe an entire season or an entire, you know, section of the calendar. So that puts us in a different perspective, because when you're hosting in the online era, as you have had to in the past, I mean, the difference is the difference between hosting in a studio and hosting just online must be massive as well. Just those two factors. But I was curious as to your perspective on how that changes the game when you don't have a live crowd to necessarily play off of. When there isn't a crowd that's like, in a sense, a captive audience, like they're there, they might be on their phones or whatever, but they're going to be able to hear you guys while you're giving your analysis desk points. And you get that sort of live feedback in a way that, unless you're checking Twitch chat or something, and even then, good luck actually finding any actual feedback. It's probably just you know, a bunch of spams or copy pastas. Yeah. So cast your stop talk, right? That's usually the feedback that you get. So like, what is the difference in your mind from hosting, like, as we've had to transition into this online only era of Counter-Strike and Valorant, and what was it like to finally move from the online stuff to studio stuff at the very least, and how much are you looking forward to the LAN return? Like, what do you think are the key differences between all three of these styles?
So there's multiple points you can touch on here. I'm going to start when we first went to online. So basically, I probably had one of the best years when it went on to online, because there's even more work for me to do, because some people just didn't have good setups to be online and doing the things they needed. So I was very fortunate like that. The first online broadcast where we were not even in the studio, so we're all doing it from home. That was crazy difficult. But like, for example, Blast sent us cameras, they sent us backdrops and things. And that was incredible. That was so good to work from, because like, you basically felt like you were in it, but you weren't. The difficult part is the delay. No one can prepare you for the delay, especially as a host. Like, if you notice, a lot of conversations went from like me talking and just easy direct by looking at someone without saying the name every time, to almost you had to get a fine art with it. And I think what we did with Blast was like, we at the beginning stumbled, and the same with DreamHack, where it was like you'd have a few moments talking over each other, you wouldn't know where the pause was, the delay could be too big. But then other parts were, as you got used to it, you almost could time it without having to be like, oh, Maniac every time, Maniac, Pimp, this. Like, you wouldn't have to give the names the whole time. So you learn a better way of doing it. And I think that comes more to the skill of the host, because some people just really couldn't find their own flow and form, and it would mess with them. Now we've moved back into the studios, and I'm so happy for that, because, okay, yeah, like you said, we're not in the arenas, we don't have the fans near us, but it still feels so much better. It's still, it makes you really happy. And one thing me, Maniac, and Pimp did is like, I'll sit down, I'll start banging on the desk that's in front of us, and just like, we'll be making noise, we'll be just hyping our own things up, and we'll be having and we just try to feed off each other's energy. And I think that's also a part of the host role that people do not like put enough weight in. Is like hyping up the people around you. Like, if you ask, if it doesn't matter if Maniac or Pimp had a bad day, or even if I've had a bad day, sometimes those guys have picked me up as well. Like, you could just wake up on the wrong side of the bed, for example. But every time, no matter what, before those cameras went, when we're getting the countdown in our ear, we'd start hyping the place up. We make stupid noises or whatever, and try and deliver the same level. But you also don't want to overhype again, because then it gets into some madness. I think the crazy part is like, a lot of people unfairly would tweet at people like me or Frankie, who also do the interviewer role for ESL, and they'd be like, "Oh, it's so unfair. Like, they're not hiring an interviewer for this now, because you'd often do it on the desk." And the reason some people wouldn't hire an interviewer is because people have got to realize this: when it moves from online and you're not in the arenas anymore, you're in a situation where you can't probably expect the same sponsors. And I don't know this for a fact, but I'm assuming the sponsors are not paying the same money, because they don't have the same space, right? You don't have people live there to sell products to test products, to see it. So obviously they're not going to pay the same money they were for the event. The viewership is going to be slightly increased. Yeah, sure, we had that, no problem. But not all of that can be directly monetized in the same way. When it comes to the arenas themselves and not being there, maybe you save some money of not having the arena, sure. But it's this trade-off that people need to understand, because I remember replying to one guy and I was just like, look, I understand why we're not hired as an interview, because why would I be there to do interviews in a studio in Germany, or if it's Denmark or wherever, when there are no players there, and I'd still be doing it online. It doesn't make sense. So everyone had to adapt in a different way, and everyone had to look at maybe new ways of content. You look at one thing across all tournament organizers, the smart ones are the ones that started to pump more into content, right?
Yes.
Do some pieces with the talent you had, do some live pieces. And okay, it wasn't maybe the best, or they were learning as they went with it, but at least they were trying to make something happen there. And it's all about just being able to adjust, I feel. And some people can do it, some people can't, but there's always some sort of fans will complain about it and not be happy with some degree of it. But for me, I found it a new challenge. I found it fun. Sometimes it was frustrating. I remember one time my internet went down, so I now have 2 lines back at home just in case that does happen. I was actually, for one segment of DreamHack, I was connected through my mobile tethering to my laptop and doing it that way. That was a unique one. We still make it work, and that's, like you said, it's the beauty of what esports offers, is in a click of a finger we could move everything around. We didn't have to worry anymore.
Yeah, and it was huge as well to have the sort of. It's almost like you do have that regression, which I think maybe a lot of fans were tapping into with their complaints, right? They felt like, oh, that we're going backwards. This is going back to, like, a couple of years in the past, maybe even more,
Yep.
depending on what happens. A little bit different than the technical issues, but the format of the tournaments being so long definitely was a talking point in the last year. The fact that there
Yep.
was a lot of tri-casts and whatnot that people weren't necessarily super on in terms of how they liked them. That also was affecting, I think, viewer reactions and stuff. But despite the fact that, yes, it's not going to be as banging as all of the LANs were in 2019 or even early 2020, when we did have a couple of LANs to start things off. I Am Katowice, for example, even though there was no crowd, super memorable as like an online viewer. That's
Yep.
something that was like kind of the last thing that we had, really. And despite the fact that, yes, it's not as good as some of those are, the fact that we can still pivot is really, like you said, it's certainly the beauty of esports in that respect. And maybe that's also another thing to consider in general, is the idea that because we have the ability to adapt on the fly, maybe it's not great for the short term. Like, maybe this event is just not as good as it could have been if it were on LAN, but the event still happened. And I think a lot of viewers maybe didn't consider, like, what if there were no events, which was a real possibility if
Yep.
you're in sports, right? If you're in regular sports, like, what if a player catches COVID and they spread it to the whole locker room because they're not in their own isolated areas or something, right? So, one of the other angles to this as well, you mentioned player interviews. Obviously, you've done your own set of interviewing players, even on the desk. Obviously, you've had to, like, ask
Yeah.
the exit interviews. A player comes out of a match they just won, or maybe they just lost, and you're able to ask some questions. Did that change at all in terms of the mannerisms for what you normally do? Because, once again, it's
Oh
online.
yeah.
There's like a delay. You've got to try not to step on too much, but you also have to make the throws super obvious, maybe by name as well, because they're not there in person. So how did you sort of adapt to that respect? Because players sometimes are a little bit hard to read in general. They're not the same. All of the hours that they put into Counter-Strike, they're not putting into practicing being an on-air personality, which is one of the reasons why they find it so challenging when they decide to come on the analyst desk for the first time. They think this will be easy because I just make points, and then maybe they freeze up or something, right? So what do you think that was, like, the biggest change in that respect? Because when you're talking to players, especially through Discord or something like that, it can get a little bit tough in terms of how it all goes down for the broadcast.
Oh, it really can. And like, there's a lot of interviewers that struggle specifically because it went online. Because, first of all, they may not know the players. Like, I'm really lucky that I knew the players before, right? And I knew the players then as they went up in their career. And I was able to have a rapport with a lot of players that I've interviewed. Like, I always put in-person interviews start off by having like a minute conversation or so with them anyway, and just get them relaxed. You can't do that when it goes into this mode. And you would see the really skilled interviewers and maybe the not so skilled interviewers in how they would deal with something like this, because I would often be getting a player, and sometimes the player would change last minute because it's like, oh, that person's camera is not very good, or their room's too dark, or it's not going to be good enough quality. So we just got a brand new player, and you have to think on the fly. Okay, change up the questions, and there is none of this pre-recorded or anything like. It's literally live, there, done. You got to deal with the hand you've got in front of you, and it's unique, it's challenging, but also to try and get them to elaborate some more on their answers and push them a bit harder, you had to be tougher. And that's actually one thing I feel like myself and Pimp do really well, is if we maybe don't get the answer straight away first time, we can push for a little bit more. But you also know when to not push. Like, I've seen many people do this, and they'll push and they'll push, and you can see the player really doesn't want to, or he's uncomfortable with it. And it's like, okay, at that point you need to stop, because it's just getting awkward or too cringe. And I think that's the worst thing. Like, you don't want it to be too cringe at all. But I think the beauty of what we've got is that some of these players now are better media trained. Like some of these
Yes.
younger players, certainly they're learning their way, but we've got to a stage now where this is becoming much more normal, much more I'd say their everyday life, right? That they need to do this media, especially in online where they're having to do even more media and online games and little mini games to create extra content and stuff. But yeah, online interviews were tough. We learned to deal with it. It was just so hard because you don't get the feeling, You can either get the warmth of a person after a huge win, or if they've lost, how crushed they are. Can you push it this far? So you've really got to try and look for the little details, maybe how they're sat or how they're looking. And it's probably a very underestimated view on how you do the interviews. But some of these interviews turned out fantastically. Some of them created them epic moments. Others you go, oh, we did the best we could do. But like, that's on us.
Of course. So another thing that is certainly linked with this, but I also want to sort of cycle back to when we are talking about, throwing to Maniac or Pimp on the blast desk, for
Yep.
example, is this is a narrative that maybe is kind of like the concept of most people when they think of an analyst desk is, I think maybe it's still lagging behind from years and years ago when this was a little bit more true as a stereotype, but they think of like the hype man as the host, and then the two knowledgeable nerds who maybe need that drawn out of them in some respect. And they maybe they just, like, the average viewer hasn't adapted their current conception of what an analyst desk, and complete with the analysts and the host, really is. Like, what does a desk look like? So what I'm curious about is how you found the adaptation process of your own knowledge base in Counter-Strike to have to sort of evolve, because something I've noticed with play-by-play commentators is that they need to be more knowledgeable about the game compared to maybe
Definitely.
5 years ago, right? Because they need to be able to deliver not just hype, but also, like, they need to know when to deliver that hype, because they need to be able to say, this is a big kill, or maybe this is just an eco frag. And no matter how impressive the crosshair placement is, if I get super hyped about this, how am I going to take it to another level when, the gun round is here, right? So that's something that I think is more robust now in the commentary space than before. I think a similar thing has probably happened to the hosting role, where you kind of need to know enough, maybe not to be an analyst in the same sense as Maniac or Pimp are, but you need to know enough to be competitive with them, to be able to throw them and ask the right questions or pose them in the correct ways. So how has that evolved in your career in general? And do you think that you're at that, like, the peak of that right now in 2021?
Can I just say, I fucking love you for saying this, because so many people are so dumb on this. Like the amount of tweets I get where people are like, "Oh, you shouldn't have an opinion because you're the host," and it's like, no, 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 no. Like, you got to understand. Did you want to have a good three-way conversation? The host has to know something, and that's another reason why I don't work on games I'm not passionate about or I don't
Yes.
understand. Like, people may not know this, but I even competed in Virtual Fighter 5 at a professional level. I've got a silver medal from World Cyber Games. It's a fighting game. I love fighting games, and people, when they first saw me go to Street Fighter and did a hosting role for them, they're like, "What the hell is this guy?" I did my research, I put my time, and I knew what was going on with it all. And it's so key, because a host that doesn't know anything, right, can ask the wrong questions. You can watch many, even at the tier 1 level, many hosts here who are definitely, like, they might play the game, they might have a bit of skill behind it, but they have to keep it so generic and play off their analysts. For me, I've been involved in CS for a long time. I was last professional in 2007. That's a long time ago, but I can still watch the game and see good points. And I feel like the hosts that always have to rely on their analysts to either feed them information or to throw the conversation for them is not doing their job properly enough. You need to also steer the ship. I always talk about it being a ship, because we've gone away now from being just a host that goes, "Oh, what did you think about this? Oh, what did happen here?" Because there's so many details. We actually don't have enough time to do full analysis as it would be. That's why we've got amazing content creators who deep dive and go through it all. And I think for a host now, like, I feel like I'm definitely not at the peak of it, but like, I'm spending less time playing the game, which is what I did at the beginning, because I come from 1.6. When Go came out, I was a lot of people not too sure in it. I didn't put as many hours into Go. And then I was like, okay, now I'm going to play Go. I now understand all the basics of the game to a very high level. But now I've got these programs to look at setups and where the tactical executions are and things. There's plenty of different programs out there that you can spend a little bit of money on, and you can load a demo into and see it will go around. And there's this Skybox, for example, is a great way of looking at things. And I even see, for example, Semler now, before we go into a game, he'll be looking and saying, okay, what's the tendencies here, what to look at? And that's it. There's maybe analyst commentators, but some analyst commentators now even need to deliver the hype, and they need to take a bit of play-by-play. It's very mixing and molding in. They don't just have to be completely separate. And I think that's what creates like a best either commentary duo or a best desk. Like me, Maniac, and Pimp, we said this at the end of last year. that we would happily work for any TO that wants to hire us three to do a desk, because the synergy we have now after a year and the passion we have together and the understanding is a whole different ballgame. Like, Maniac's got his little bit of bias towards the French scene. I have my Navi fan craziness, and then we've got Pimp out there who's supposed to be a fan of Danes but isn't really. He just loves good Counter-Strike and gets memed on about it. Like, we've built this rapport up that I don't think you get from many other desks. And that's not saying we're the best desk, because we can definitely improve, but I feel like we offer something else a lot of desks just don't do right now. And it comes strongly from us all having a good input on it. Like, I'll sit there and Maniac will tell me, "Oh, I'm looking at this clip, I want to use this." I'm like, "Cool, yeah, perfect." But then I'll say something, I'm like, "Did you not notice that this is how they're playing B now? Like, this player's rotated over to here and he's staying there, I don't know, 30 seconds longer on the B site on Inferno, for example. And they're keeping 3 players there that long, which leaves their A hit vulnerable." And we can spin that off each other. But the fans, for some reason, unless you were an ex-pro or you've been an analyst for a long time, they just won't have it. And that's where it's funny, because even some people now that come in don't even realize that Maniac was an ex-pro. Like, you almost have to reiterate the information, because there's so many new people coming to Counter-Strike now. So, like, when I'm telling people, like, "Oh, I played back in 2007," they're like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I played against people like Zonic, like Heaton, like all these old school guys many, many years ago." And people, that's what blows my mind. People don't even know who Spawn and Heaton are. And, like, these are two of the most, like, legendary 1.6 players from Sweden, achieved some of the biggest successes in the game. And because we're evolving so much further now, these younger guys that come in, they're not looking back at that. They're not even looking back at early CSGO. They're looking at what's in front of them, and they're looking at, like, the Nikos, the devices, the Simples, the Zyrus. That's all they're focused on. So it's almost like we need a bit of, like, education training of people to go back into there. But I think it's never a bad thing if the host is adding value to it and having a point. And they could be wrong. I've said things before, and Pimp's like, "I don't agree with you." Do you know what? Pimp and Maniac disagree on a lot of things, and you see it on the desk. That's what makes a good desk, having difference of opinions.
Right, and being able to actualize that and like you said, steer the ship as the host.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to spend a little bit more of your time thinking about how you're going to set up the next point or how you're going to transition into the next topic. But being able to have topics that you've come up with and that you've talked over is definitely a huge part of it. Like, I just know this from hosting the talk shows that I've done, is that if I come in with just, "What do you guys think about this news?" Like, it's going to be a very dry show. It's going to be very, very boring, or more heavily reliant on my guest than on my host. And that's definitely
Yeah.
a major thing as well, and something to keep in mind. So another thing you mentioned there is that there's a lot of new players coming in, new fans coming into the game. And obviously Counter-Strike is touted as this endlessly watchable thing that's super accessible for anybody, because they can just walk in, they see a headshot, they see an AK-47, they see a bomb, they kind of get the idea. And then you can really tap into those nuances, the economy and, like, the spray patterns and all of the more advanced, well, we say advanced, but basic mechanics of the game that then spiral out into these advanced strategies. And that it's almost like, if you're going to be a fan and you're going to be super engaged, you almost want to tell these people, like, "Hey, you kind of have a responsibility to go back and look at the greats, Heaton and Spawn," right? And so I was curious about if you've had any pushback in this opinion, because, or what you think of the whole concept, because I've asked this of a number of my guests in general, and there seems to be a consensus that you can go to a higher level of analysis in the Counter-Strike space than you can in some other games, because the fans who are not interested in that high level analysis it's okay to leave them behind, and the fans who are interested can come along for the ride and learn something. And maybe that doesn't happen in League of Legends, or maybe even Valorant right now, because it's just so new. And maybe that just happens to a disproportionate amount in CS by comparison. So what's your take on that, and how you present those more higher level concepts? Like, is it more interesting to you to do that than to obviously, like, have to explain, like, you wouldn't have to go as low as what is a smoke or what is a spray pattern, but having to break down some things again and again, I imagine that would make things less enjoyable for the desk, because you guys are going to be recycling the same concept. So do you think that CS is, like, unique in that space where you can just always go to something new that a team has done without worrying about leaving people behind?
Yeah, I think that, like, as long as they have the initial play time under them to understand, like, there are lineups for smokes, right? There is a flash you can bounce off a wall here and it blinds this much of an area. There's a molly that you can land that is going to make sure they're trapped in this position. Then, as long as we're doing our job properly, they should be able to understand the rest alongside it. That doesn't mean that they'll be able to execute it themselves, though, right? That's the other thing. And that's where the more geeky people come involved into it, and I say geeky in, like, a good way, is the
Yes.
people who really deep dive. people who will go onto a server and make content off the back of it. And I think tournament organizers are not in a position at the moment to make all this content. It's literally impossible. But we'll get to the stage eventually where they have bigger content teams and can do it. But also some of that content doesn't hit big numbers. I watched some amazing YouTube videos where they're still teaching me some lineups and I'm going, ooh, this is actually how Navi did it. I'm going to take that. I'm going to do this. Well, this is what Australia's doing here on the A side. I can put that into how I play my game with my friends, just for an example. But those views I see on those videos, they're not in the 10,000s plus. They're in the like 3 to 4,000s. And one thing Foreign does incredibly well is he's always tweeting out about other people's content who you may have never heard of, right? And Sponge has been doing it recently. He's been picking things from Reddit and saying, oh, this, and this is actually really good content. Because the average viewer does need to learn that a little bit more if they want to go further. But if we go further and they'll still understand the basic concept, they may switch off or they may go do something else, sure, but it doesn't hinder our broadcast. And I think that's the good balance Counter-Strike has managed to have. How we managed to find that balance, I have no idea, but it somehow works, maybe just based on the concept of the game and what they see. And also the storytelling and the pictures that are being painted by the commentators. They do a really good job in actually. So, for example, there's many times where Launders, for example, will say, oh, they're doing this here now. And he can't break much of that down because that's live happening in the round for him. But then I'll see Maniac and Pimp go, oh, actually, that's really interesting. And we'll jot it down. It'll be put on a note. And then we can open it up. So if you've been there from the start to finish, and trust me, you look at any broadcast, the game viewership will always drop by like, I don't know, 10, 20,000 as soon as it comes to the desk. Because some people don't give a damn. Some people are there just to watch their team win, watch some headshots be popped, and they don't want to understand the rest of it. But there is a great amount of people that still do. And I believe we're beginning to find the balance on it. It's something magical, I guess, something beautiful in that way.
Something that I'm definitely keeping watch of is how far the viewing figures do fluctuate in that sense, and
Yeah.
I have started to be a little bit more surprised by how big the number still is in the middle of the analyst desk, which speaks to the quality of the product that you guys are putting on, obviously, but also to that sense that the community is still hungry for more information about it, and they want to see those takes from the analysts, and they want to maybe see like how their favorite team lost that match or how they won that match or something to that effect. So definitely something that's interesting, especially the first time you brought up content in this talk show or in this interview that we've been doing is that you mentioned that you can't cover everything just because logistically it's not possible. And that's in part due to the fact that the analyst desk is, some would say, constrained. It's just structured in a different way, right? It's set up in a way where you have like maybe X amount of minutes to go over X amount of points. And I was curious as to your thought on like what the ramifications of that are, and not necessarily saying like, oh, I think it would be better if it was longer or something to that effect. I'm just curious as like, do you think that there are a list of like pros and cons, so to speak, for the actual analyst desk format as it currently is? Have you had any ideas for how to shake it up and maybe change some things so that it can be improved even further, or do you think that like in its current format it's great because of X reasons? Like what's your take on just the format right now for analyst desks?
So I want to keep the exact format we have because between maps, so it's very important that we get the 5 to 7 minutes, however long we get, to talk about some of the key moments. And that could just be even one player had an incredible game, one player didn't hit so well. Like we're always gonna have to touch on the numbers for the basic out there. We can deep dive and pick a few clips. And this is we had a few moments where we could get the mic'd up moments of Blast, or we take a moment where, so the mic'd up moments, obviously, for anyone that didn't see it or didn't know, is where we get to hear the team comms and you get to go through that. And we can elaborate on that as people who have been in that position before and talk about what that means. Then there's another bit where like Maniac will choose a play, talk about the play, and then Pimp will also get it replayed and go in a bit more detail and we'll look at the little things. Problem is we have to pick out, maybe there's 10 things really good that happen in a game. You have to pick out one or two.
Yes.
What I would love, and this is what we started to see towards the end of what's 21 now, 2019. There you go, I'm getting lost on my years. Is after shows. And if you think of like a football game or a basketball game, as they end, we'll see maybe a 30-minute, hour-long show afterwards that has a lot of things they can look at. I would love if we regularly had, and this obviously again would take more manpower, more time. Sometimes we're finishing at like midnight and you still have to be able to go put the show on, for example. I want to see a regular after show. If it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes, but what we do is we pick from top to bottom of how the games went in order. Oh, this, and this, and this we didn't get to touch into. Let's go into more detail here. But it requires so much in terms of, it probably would require an individual sponsor. So I don't know, just I've got a Razer mouse in front of me. Razer sponsored after show, for example, or the after show by Razer. I'm not trying to be funny, trying to create anything up here, but just as something that someone could take. You sell that to them, that's theirs, and that's what then goes into the deeper details. But you also have to look at the viewership and things, right? Maybe you can get some players on, maybe you can talk. But again, there's so many moving parts of this that I don't have the answer and how it would be done perfectly, but I just dream that we get to that stage. So we have our pre-show, which we always do. Everyone's doing pre-shows now. I'd actually prefer, like, we do an hour pre-show before the whole tournament, and then we go into like 30-minute pre-show every day. I would love if it's always 30-minute pre-show no matter what, and then we do the whole show. We have a normal analyst segments in there, and then afterwards we have an after show that's an hour dedicated to it all. But we'd really have to fix the timings. Like, that could never be a day where it's more than 2 best of 3s, for example. We'd probably have to start a bit earlier just because of the length of games. Maybe if we get to the stage where you do 1 game a day, that's maybe more manageable. But hopefully some smart eggs, some smart tournament organizers can get together and maybe pitch this and make it work. But that's personally what I'd love to see.
Okay, and that's very similar in a way, I think, to what Flashpoint's Blind Spot was supposed to be. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, they have that as the after show for a while, but I believe they also had plans to bring in players and have them, obviously the COVID canceled a lot of those plans, but the players would be sitting down with some beers, which would have probably been even more banter than they were initially expecting, if I had to guess. Some of those characters, especially if, had Smooya stayed around, for example, in that tournament. So, yeah, things definitely could have gone that way. And like you said, at the end of 2019, with Flashpoint 1 in 2020, like, they were trying to push things in that direction, and I really appreciated like the Launders and Scrawny Blast after shows that they had been doing, because that was exactly what you were saying. It's like, if you saw something that was so absolutely impactful for you as like a fan, maybe you, like, the TOs could even like have a tweet up, say, oh, what moments do you want us to go over in the after show, something like that. You could even drive like more fan interaction in some sense. There's a lot of ways that you could make that work, and I think it does. That's one area where we talked at the beginning of the show about the professionalism of sports and TV broadcasts and stuff. That's something we can take from them and say, like, repurpose to make it work better for esports in that sense. I think that would be like a great angle, so to speak. And so here's a question to bridge the gap between CS and Valorant side of things. I'm curious as to what your take is on how Valorant's tournaments have been shaping up. Do you think this is an argument that I've heard from, is that the reason why some people believe that the CS tournaments are better, beyond people who think, obviously Counter-Strike is just more established, so there's going to be a lot more fans for that game compared to Valorant? I'm curious as to your thought, because people are sometimes saying, like, they were initially hamstrung on the tournament side because everything was online. So we haven't even gotten to really see a LAN with an arena, with a crowd, with all of the same prestige as normal. We did see some LANs in the bubble that they had, but there wasn't to the same degree that we would normally see for what example, like Worlds in League of Legends, by example. So
yeah.
What do you think the current status is of the Valorant tournaments, and where do you think that they're going to go in terms of their trajectory? Because obviously people are talking about CS and Valorant competing. A lot of people think that they can share space. Some people think it's a zero-sum game. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the tournament side of things, because I've only really heard people talk about the player base, or maybe the esports from the players' perspectives, but not really anything about the TOs' perspectives and how they're slotting in and how the talent are finding it. So is it more of the same when it comes to Valorant compared to CS, or do you think there are some really stark differences currently?
Oh, there's massive differences. So I'll start by saying, like, a lot of people were questioning why I would even go cover Valorant when I cover CS. As I mentioned, I only do things I'm passionate about. And I've played CS since 2003 in every different version. Wasn't really a Source player, went from 1.6, played a bit of Source into Go. But I've played and watched this game over and over again. When I saw Overwatch, didn't really interest me. When I saw different FPS games that come out and try be a 5v5 shooter or a 3v3 shooter, like, it wasn't something that I enjoyed. With Valorant, we had a good mix of something that reminded me a bit like 1.6 with some cool abilities, but also it was the challenge to learn something that, like, I'd never have to deal with all these abilities and stuff. Like, you just had grenades and basic stuff. This was like, whoa, okay, this is crazy. And like Call of Duty, for instance, never interested me, never really played it. Like, I do a bit of Warzone with my friends because they're not really in the esports space. It's like a good chill game, but this is the first game where I've just put so much time into and so much enjoyment. And I feel like when it comes to the tournament side, it's in a completely different space to what CS is. Like, these two can exist and coexist and compete with each other, sure. But this whole, like, Valorant killer or CS killer or whatever, that, like, I'm so bored of that. It doesn't even make sense. Like, we can definitely, we've got League of Legends, we've got Dota. games that have the similar style, but they run side by side with their own communities. I feel like most likely we'll see that Riot will take a similar approach like they did with League of Legends to Valorant. Some of the negatives on that from the talent side for us, like I am not picked for Europe, like I mentioned earlier, which is a big shame for me and Mitch. But I was offered NA, and then I got told that it's region locked. So because I'm a European, I cannot cover the North America. And it's like, wouldn't you just want the best talent to
Right.
work on your game? But I also understand it from their part that also you're going to grow North American talent, right? If they don't just want a bunch of old CS people still doing it, they want to bring new people up. Fair enough. It's your choice of it. But for the tournament side of it, it's very difficult because Ignition Series was all you would make a pitch, you would talk to Riot, and you would say, I want to run this event. And they would give it to, say, even G2 ran one, FaZe ran one, We Play, Blast, loads of different tournament organizers. ESL, they, for their own reasons, stayed completely away from it. But now we've gone into this Champions Tour, and this is all Riot run. It's being like white labeled, so different companies around the world will take it. Some Riot, like Riot Brazil is running the Brazilian one, but like for EU, it's Freaks for You. You can see their logo down the bottom of the VCT website. For North America, it's Nerd Street Gamers, who have done fantastic events within it. And I just hope that they don't ever cut it to the point where you have to be Riot and follow these rules to do it. Like, I still want it to be open enough to make tournaments. I don't know, me and you could put together $2,000 and say we're going to run a small tournament that's going to help grassroots of Valorant or whatever. I'd like that with it. My biggest concern is that if they do try and cut it off in such a big way, that it will hinder the development and growth on it, because it's no doubt at the moment that NA is huge for Valorant, right? Big names, big organizations, they're topping the charts. But Europe, we've been on a real slow start. Even before I made the Alliance team, I was talking to teams, like I was in the Astralis offices here in Copenhagen, and I'm telling them, like, look, there's a good future in this game. I recommend you look at it and potentially pick up a team. Like, I was pushing big European organizations where I had any contact or knowledge to say, I recommend, and I strongly recommend you get involved with Valorant, but obviously do your own due diligence. But I see it as something that's got potential. The viewership side of thing doesn't really bother me because it's still a new game, right? At the moment, the streamers get huge numbers for sure, but more people are starting to enjoy the tournament aspect. It is still a competitive game. It's not one that's going to be megally casual where you're just going to want to watch streamers all the time, maybe like a Fortnite, which is more popular streaming than it is on the tournament side. But I just hope that Riot learn a little bit from the other games around them. And it doesn't mean they have to copy everything from Counter-Strike, but an open system has helped quite massively with the development and growth of players, and they can still have their involvement. They can still approve things, so we don't get maybe horrible tournament organizers who don't pay out the money. We don't want to see that for sure. But there should hopefully be a balance found of it. I'm hoping that answered all your question. I know I went off on a bit of a tangent on that.
No,
I think
that
that
totally
covered most
works.
of it.
I actually have a follow up right off of that anyway, because you mentioned earlier that obviously you're managing the Alliance team, and how that's been a bit of a rough start for you in Europe specifically, because like, it doesn't seem like too many people are interested in
Dude,
adopting.
we were shouting for so long, right? Like literally me and Mitch on a broadcast. And this is another thing. So North America would have all big names, all big talent. Me and Mitch were commentating for like, okay, and maybe sometimes our normal rate, maybe a little bit lower, so not full money, but we love the game. And they were like, okay, we can only hire 2 of you. And we're like, what do you mean? So there's no host? There's no. So we were host, analyst, interviewing. Like, we were the entire show, all because we believed in the game, all because we loved the game from start to finish. And I think that's why it hurts me most, is that like we'd sit there and we'd see teams who were not signed and be like, someone picked this team up. Like, these are one of these best up and coming teams. They deserve to be picked up. And like, then Liquid came around, G2 were around. Like, we started to get big names, but a lot of teams took a long time to even want to invest there. And I understand they've been burnt by Counter-Strike for a long time with the issues in that. And I feel like with Valorant, and I think this is why it hurts me so much to be split from Mitch in the duo bit and be in this scenario, is because we really love this game. We've given everything to it. We've used every way we could to push things further here in Europe, and the players know that. The community knows that and respects it. It's hopefully something Riot will learn from. Maybe they'll watch this one day and they'll understand and they'll go, oh, okay, look, these people really do love the game, because passion is such a driving force in it. We know we've got the ability. Sure, we can improve, but passion across everything is key. And you don't want to hinder a game that is growing so fast. Like, look when it released during COVID. Perfect timing, by the way. Like, literally dropped. I couldn't leave my room for 3 months. I think I played Valorant every day. I was there from day one of the beta, got my key from Riot, and I was like, I'm just playing Valorant. That's all I did. Play Valorant, stream Valorant. I was actually moving house, and my poor fiance had to deal with me setting up in our bedroom because we didn't have a big enough apartment at the time. And I was literally in the bedroom streaming, non-stop playing Valorant, trying to learn the game, trying to grind it out. And North America, everyone jumped on it. I think maybe because there were so many pros in North America that came from other games that had success, but they jumped on it early enough. They got good contracts, and there's always this conversation that there's a lot more marketing spend and money over in North America than Europe because of like the details of where you're based, country, stuff like that. But EU teams, they just took a while to get onto it, but they actually are incredibly skilled, and I think the future is really bright. But I'm just really worried about this whole locking down, these region locking and stuff like that. We need to make sure we still have it as open as possible, and we can have like, I don't know, ESL just decide they want to run a Valorant. They talk to Riot, they say, yeah, cool, and it doesn't affect anything as long as it doesn't clash with the main tour dates from Riot. Then to me, it shouldn't be a problem, and that's how we'll grow everything. That's how we'll keep the ecosystem healthy.
Right. And that's exactly my next question is, do you think that not only were some obviously the teams were not necessarily super keen on jumping on this opportunity immediately, but I also noticed that there was a number of broadcast talent that maybe dipped their toes in, but they didn't want to give it full force. They didn't want to go as hard as you and Mitch did, for example. So I'm curious as if in general you feel like there's just this maybe stigma associated with Riot specifically, because there's a lot of people who say, and rightfully so, if you look at their background, I would say, and what they've done with League of Legends, there's a lot of things to be concerned about. Like you said, you're worried that maybe they go down the same League of Legends region locking route and they do something similar, and it seems like maybe they're already on track to do that. Do you think that these fears of what might happen to Valorant are, in essence, like well-founded? You share some of them, obviously, but do you think that was a good enough reason to sort of avoid the opportunity, or do you kind of feel like people are just a little silly for not even trying? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I think so I'll start with the organization and team perspective, right? From an org, you basically have to look at, do you want to be in another FPS title? If you're not in Counter-Strike, you're not in anything like that, do you want Valorant to be your first? Do you understand the business mechanics behind Riot, what they've offered? For example, any of the teams that are a League of Legends team right now, to me, and again, I have no insight on this or how this works because I'm not into do with League of Legends. The only time I went to League of Legends is I took my son to go watch it because he likes it, because it's obviously less crazy than Counter-Strike. I don't want my 4-year-old son watching Counter-Strike. Shock's got us some tickets. We went there, had like a family day, great fun in Berlin. But I don't know any of the details of franchising and stuff between League of Legends. But if you are a League of Legends organization and you are already under the Riot umbrella, would it not make perfect sense to pick up a team in their FPS game? Like that to me is just like instant yes, right? That makes sense. G2 did it, but then you come onto the question when it comes to the player side of things. Are some of the players asking for too much? Like some of the players I spoke to when building Alliance, the salaries they were asking for was almost the same level as CS, and I'm thinking, where do you live? Like, what is your brain doing right now to make you think that you need this salary? Because there isn't a great amount of tournaments. There is not a huge amount of like the stream numbers in comparison. And some of you are just building your brand up. Like Counter-Strike, I know what's happening over the next year. And that was what was great about what Riot put out. The VCT, we know the whole year schedule, right? We understand what's going on. Plus, there's going to be some smaller tournaments. Like we just had the Red Bull one happen just this week. So just last week even. So there is that side of it, but I do wonder if there's something that I'm not aware of that people are scared of, because I personally don't really care about rumors about what people say or believe in Riot. I don't know any truths to it. I've never worked with them. I don't understand it. I only speak to a few people who are like not involved directly with it. So my understanding is this game's pretty good. This game has all the game mechanics that can make something successful, and they pretty much nailed it to make League of Legends the biggest esport title there is. So like, that maybe I'm missing something completely, but the only bit I'm worried about is the locking it down so that we can't have as much grassroots stuff. That's the only thing I can see hindering it right now. And I hope that they will build it up enough that these organizations will start to see, now that they've given us a schedule, that, oh, this is worth investing in. And we are seeing that, right? There's rumors that Astralis are going to come, Fnatic, Excel, Rogue, all these people are looking at teams, and they're looking at teams in Europe, some of them. So fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
Now, you mentioned earlier that when you and Mitch were casting some of the unsigned teams that were super talented, that was presumably the start of how you guys decided to put together the Alliance and have maybe like you had a nice firsthand experience casting a lot of these players. So, you know, like, oh, this guy's got potential. I've seen him deliver. I can maybe approach him to sign him for the team. So can you walk us through how the partnership with the Alliance came to be? Like how you guys decided to sit down and actually take that one on?
So I'll tell you that this is where it's so wild, and people probably gonna think, "Oh, why is he such an idiot?" Like I was approached, and I don't know. Like I've never been a general manager. I've never been a team builder. Like I managed a StarCraft 2 Korean team, and I was their European manager. But basically meant I booked flights and made sure they were fine in Europe. That was it. I didn't do anything special. Did a bit of like marketing videos, and that was it. And like I was an in-game leader once and a team captain for CS, but I basically got approached at the beginning of Valorant by 3 different big organizations, and they were offering like some guy offered me 10k euros per month, and he was like, "I want you to build my team and be a general manager." But they were a very new org. I wasn't too sure on like the trust side of things, and also like, and if they're watching this, no offense, but you guys are very new. You have a lot of money, but I wanted something with a bit more infrastructure if I'm going to do this. Because for me, it's all about if I do something, if I fail or I make a few mess ups, fine, but my goal is success, and I wanted the right project. So I know Loda from when I was actually hosting Dota last year. We've always followed each other on Twitter. We've never really had too many interactions, but I was just talking, and he was like, "Oh, look, I've been looking at Valorant. We've never been in an FPS, but it'd be nice to get in one early." And I basically pitched him my vision, and I said to him, "As long as you're in my vision and we align on these things for what Alliance stand for and what I see for a Valorant team, I will take a smaller salary than what these people are offering me, as long as I can still do my talent work. Because my talent work is my bread and butter. It's the thing I love the most." But I said, I will build a team and I will put my 110% in. And we had a load of back and forth. We were looking at teams, we were looking at players. I was talking with Load, I was talking with Kelly, the owners of the Alliance organization. And eventually they were just like, okay, this is what you got. This is what you got to try and make it happen. Give us the best you can. And they fully trusted me. And the great thing about Alliance is it is player owned in a sense that like Loader used to be a player, right? And Kelly was a player back in the day, and they've grown up into this. It's not owned by investors or people with tons of backing of money. They make smart decisions with it. And everyone knows them for their Dota team, but they also got a really successful Apex team, for example. They had some Fortnite players before. Um, Now with Valorant, this is not a small thing to jump into, right? It's a big 5v5 FPS game. The salaries are certainly not small when it comes to it. Um, I spoke to some teams and I was like, okay, I like you as a team, but I don't like maybe two, three players in there, or 1 or 2 players in there. And some teams, like I said, were asking for way more money than what I feel is the current market value. And I wanted to stick to my vision of building a team, and I just built it from the ground up, piece by piece. And me and Mitch benefited from being able to see all of these guys from the very early days. The mechanical skills, like Mitch is a super good analyst. I understand like amazing crosshair placement, right? And good understanding of the situation. I call it good game sense. And Mitch understands like if they've got the lineups on point or if they've actually rehearsed the things. So between both of us, we kind of knew exactly what to look for, and we just started to build it out from there. And the process, and I haven't told anyone this yet, so you'll be the first for it. The process we took for building Alliance was I could have picked up a 5-man roster. I had the money to spend. I could have picked up a team that already existed. I actually considered, other than Summon FC, there was no 5-man. And by the way, Summon FC was a team that's already in talks with loads of other big organizations, so couldn't get hands on them. There is no other team that had 5 players where I'm like, cool, definitely pick those 5 up. I was very close to one, but then they broke up halfway through, which I was like, okay, great, they're breaking apart. There was others where they were like telling me, oh, we're great. And I said, yeah, I don't like you have good results now. I'm looking at the long term. So what I did was I hosted 10-man trials. And honestly, the messages these players would give me, I've never had to trial. Like, I'm good. I know this. And I'm like, yeah, you are good. I tried to tilt them. I tried to make them so angry. I took them off their agents. I put them in roles and positions they never played before. Because what I did within this 10-man thing was I chose a leader for each team who would be their potential IGL. And then I'd swap IGLs around and mix it up. And they would play with a different set of players every time. Players that were Jet mains, I would make sure you never played Jet. I wanted to see what their attitude was like, what their motivation was like, how they would react to these things. I was doing everything that would tilt me. So anything, and I tilt easy. If you watch my streams, I tilt easy playing these games because I expect better of myself, even though I'm an old man now. And I found players through this, and I was like, okay, Fear off my IGL. That's exactly what I need. This guy has all the qualities. He doesn't need to be the best fragging IGL. He doesn't need to be the one who's going to come up with the most experience from his past or anything like that. He has everything I need in a player that will work around. And he was my piece. And then what I did was have me, Mitch, and Fearoff as a triangle. And no other person would be able to join the team without all 3 of us agreeing. So it would not be one person's decision. And like there's many organizations who are currently in Valorant who were being led by their management. So you have 5 players, and the management would decide, oh, nope, kick him now, get rid of him now. And they were making terrible decisions, wasting money. And you look at it and you go, this is why you need to have someone who's not just like, I have all the power, you know. And that's what I did. Not I did well, but we did well as a 3 people with me, Fearoff, and Mitch, because there was a player, for example, Lucka, he is signed to us now. I had no interest in trialing him. Mitch and Fearoff were like, "You got to try him. You got to trial him." And I said, "Yeah, but at Nip, he played on this jet," and they were like, "Yeah, he was forced to play on the jet. He didn't even want to be a jet main." And I'm like, "All right, cool. You guys are pushing me to trial him. Let's do it." We trialed him. He's now on the signed roster. He's not playing on any of the positions or stuff he used to do. He just wasn't being utilized correctly. There's another guy. Me and Mitch saw this guy Dark Zone. He played in a Spike Nations Twitch Cup, and he's just from Portugal. He's a very skilled player. But he'd never any experience on a pro level. But I could see some skills within him. He was this close to making it to the main roster. He just didn't hit the mark for all of us in the end. We gave him feedback, but he was so happy, so motivated for the opportunity. And he potentially, I said this, if he can start now on like a challenger team and work his way up into a pro team, within a year he could be professional. But for us, what we needed at the time, it wasn't an option. It took us 2 months, just over 2 months, to build this roster. But we feel like we've got people messaging us and they're like, "Oh, why'd you pick this player? Why'd you get this player? Why didn't you pick this named person?" Not everyone that comes from CS is good, because some of them were at the end of their tethers in CS and they're just coming back for a paycheck right now. Some of these guys I've got you've never heard of. There's the Lithuanian guy in there called Kragon. He is an absolute monster. He needs some taming, and he'll admit it himself. He needs some holding back every now and again. But this guy, his skill ceiling is so high. And I feel like working with myself and Mitch and the rest of the performance staff at Alliance, we can offer these guys a hell of a lot. And I don't know if this is going to be the final roster for the whole year or whatever. But what I do know is I'm going to commit to these guys for the long term. And that's not just on a like paying them money, and this is your salary side of things. Some of them I'm working with doing like diet and gym plans for them. Like for me, I wanted to do something that's never been done before. And Henry had a similar approach, at least in like what he opened up the salaries and did something that hadn't been done before. For me, I wasn't comfortable doing that. I don't know enough about the intricacies and the business side. And I'll be honest, when it came to that, we put offers out there, and then I let the rest of the Alliance team who have been doing this for years deal with it. My focus was on the right players to try and get championships and build them for the long term. And so far, we're more than happy. And it's been an eye-opening experience for me. I've learned so much from it. And I couldn't be happier to not be right with the process, but to prove to people who were like so angry, you know, like players who I knew just expected handouts because I knew them from CS, for example. And that's never the way it should be. Everyone should have a chance. And that was what I would have never been a professional if I didn't have a chance. I signed to my first like semi-pro team. Compared to these days, you don't even count it as a pro team. I was 13 years old. I was angry. I came from the hood. I was toxic. I was aggressive. I used to like type horrible shit to people all the time. And like I had a guy who was 18. He was just going to university. He was our IGL. He was kind of like mentoring me my way through things because he saw something good in me. And I feel like that was the beauty of esports for my time. And I tried to put that into this, especially with Valorant being so new, that there are some players who they may have achieved nothing, but they have the ability to go further. And I guess we'll wait and see. Maybe I'll do an interview in a year's time and I go, I'm sat here, I'm looking like all completely depressed. My beard and hair's long. And I'm going, this was a bad idea. And I'm just drinking. But hopefully not. Hopefully it all goes well.
It seems like it was a good start. I'm curious about how you got to the point where you were able to devise that plan of 10 manning and tilting the players as much as possible, seeing who had the most resolve, because it definitely sounds like an unorthodox one, even though when you explain it and the reasons behind it, it makes perfect sense, like on its face when you lay it out that way. But I feel like it would take a little bit of a different mind to come up with that. So was that like mostly your idea? Was that, did you get inspired by somebody else doing something similar and just take it a step further? How did that approach go for building the team?
It was completely mine and Mitch's. Like this, you ask any pro player, everyone we tested, some people have been veterans. No one has ever been through this, because 10 mans is a normal thing, right? To play as like practice games and keep a high level of pros in there. But Mitch said about, oh, let's do some 10 mans so that we keep it secret. We don't give away too much what we're trialing. And then I went, do we get to choose all their agents? Mitch is like, well, yeah, we can. I'm like, cool. So I know this guy only plays Jet. He's not playing Jet. And the one player messaged me and he's like, oh, I don't know this agent. I'm like, prove me that you are at least capable of doing something off the back with nothing. And there was another guy who goes, I just won't trial if it's like this. I said, cool, you're lost. And maybe he's one of the best players in the world up and coming that I'm not aware of. But if you didn't have the right attitude and mentality, which is the most important for me, I don't give a damn. I don't care who you are and who you think you are. I had a vision for how I wanted these players. And now what I have with these, so I have two French guys, a German and two Lithuanians. One of the Lithuanian guys lives in the UK with his family. The other guy's still back home in Lithuania. These guys, other than two of them, had never played together before, right? And right now, you can go on TeamSpeak, and I come in there, we're all laughing and joking. I did one-to-ones with them today, like where we sit down and discuss all the things in and out of the game as a team. And it's like we've got friends already who never been put together. Like Hype, the Lithuanian guy who lives in the UK, he's a typical British lad in the sense of how he talks and stuff, obviously living there. And me and him have great banter. But he said to me today in a one-to-one that, like, I never would have played with these guys before. I never even would have put myself with these guys. And actually, we have such a good set of communication and understanding because of the way we were put together. Because it was like you either succeeded as a team or you failed. It wasn't going to be like we swapped a few pieces out. Sure, like before Lucker trial, there was another player in and we got rid of him. We tried Rubino at one point and then he wasn't too sure on a few things. So we tried someone else. There were options where it did swap around, but the whole thing was you either made it as the 5 or you didn't. And we found the 5 that would make it, that would be able to achieve great things.
It's definitely, like I said, a bit of an unorthodox start, but one of the things so this is reminding me of something that I remember hearing in another interview with you is that you do like to relentlessly pursue those like new opportunities. And it's sort of like what you were talking about with Valorant itself. I'm curious about how, if you've run into any roadblocks that are similar. So we're going to go back a little bit to CS here, just so that I can set the stage for this question, which is when you're coming in as a talent, more so than a team manager or somebody in the team side of things, there's always going to be a selective number of issues that disproportionately affect you or that you are tapped into more so than somebody who's maybe working as the talent manager or working as a player, for example. We've touched on a couple of those already, especially when we were talking about like the younger guys coming up and potentially like challenging you for those spots and you having to balance your time a little bit differently. So I'm curious as to, this is obviously something we talked about a little bit before the show as well, is how much of the issues like that you see currently in the space in CS are also happening in the same space in Valorant? And do you also think that like there's a narrative going around that we've come a long way? And again, that opening statement of the whole show was something to the effect of like, you know, people assume, I think it was a comment that you had made that, oh, you've made it at tier 1, so you're good, like everything's fine, right? And there's no issues. So I'm curious as to like what you think that the current issues are, and maybe you can also set us up for some sort of context as to how different it was just a couple of years back, like what has improved. Have things gotten worse in some respects? This is a huge question, so feel free to take it from any angle, but especially in the CS scene specifically, since that's the one that's more storied, have things gotten decently better? And you know, what are the core deficiencies right now from a talent's perspective?
So I think, like we touched on earlier, the biggest problem is not being locked down for long enough. We're just kind of working event to event. That's always the biggest issue. The other thing, which isn't really the TO's fault, but it is just a fault of the schedule, I guess, is that if we would love to work on more content or do extra things to support the broadcast, you very much feel like, oh, you could do that now, and then you're not there for the next one. And maybe they don't have the resources. Like the beauty of doing Blast all of last year is we had ideas. I gave loads of script written content that I made about complexity, NIP, the old 100 Thieves lineup, and I script wrote these ideas and then worked with the content team behind Blast. And then they did incredible work. They were interviewing like me, Sponge, all these other people, as well as the players. And like that was just from me noting down a few ideas of how I would picture these ideas on how these could come together. But again, it's that supportive content that's missing from it. I would say that there's also this degree of like in talent work that we are maybe not as involved in the product as we would like to be. Maybe some people, and I could just be speaking for me, but I know a few talent that would love to be in the opening processes of how this event looks. But more often than not, you get there and you're just like, okay, this is the event I'm doing, this is the work I'm doing. With Blast, every day, like I told you, we sit with the producer and he'll be happy for us to change things, add things, because he knows that we know what's best going on in the community. I feel like that's a must for every single event, like because then you've really got your finger on the trigger at all times, right? You know exactly what's going to be coming up next. You have good topics of conversation. You know what's relevant with the audience, and sometimes it becomes too like we're just doing this and plodding along. I'm trying to think other stuff talent wise, like the general conditions for talent have got a lot better. That's one thing I can praise. Like the hotel rooms have generally always been fine anyway, but now we're often getting ones which is like always with a gym. I remember back at Katowice when we didn't have a gym, ESL paid for us to have a gym that was one just like across the road from the hotel, which was fantastic. I was like, this is baller. Food has definitely got a lot better as well. Like healthier food, not just snack food the whole time. I think there's definitely more positives than negatives. I just think being included in the broadcast would be ideally better. I'm trying to think what else you asked across this question as well.
So the segue after this to get back into the
Mm.
Valorant spaces, I'm just curious about like if you've even had enough time as a Valorant sort of broadcast talent, member of talent in that sense, to take a similar approach and consider what the similarities or differences are. Because like we talked about earlier, there's not really been any lands to the same degree. There have been like
Yeah.
a couple every now and then, but it's obviously without a crowd and stuff. So because it's so much newer, maybe it hasn't had time to develop its own degree of like pros and cons to it. But I'm curious as to if there's similarities in the negatives or similarities in the positives, if it's more of the same or if it feels like maybe it's suffering from a different set of issues. What do you think about Valorant and in terms of a broadcast talent?
I feel like it's been a good chance for newer talent to get seen and get noticed, but then they also get met with the same thing of like there's experienced people that now want to jump on the game, and this is where I think like, and this doesn't mean about me and Mitch because me and Mitch are I guess more established, but there are some people who had never even commentated Counter-Strike or something like that before, and they've come in, they're really good commentators, but they don't have the social media following or they're not as well known, so they're not getting the opportunity. And I think that's a shame because I still think like, look, this is the analogy I always use. I don't care if you're a man, a woman, if you're fat, you're thin, or whatever the hell it's going to be. If you went to the doctor, yeah, and you need a serious operation, I don't care who you are, black, white, Asian, as long as you are the best at doing your job, you want the best surgeon to work on you. That's how it should be for like what we're doing on terms of the broadcast. Because I promise you, if someone looked at some research of this, you could look at someone with the biggest following on social media, and if he's commentating the game, I don't think the increase in viewers are going to be that huge, especially amongst talent. We got some talent with like 100, 200K followers, sure. But I do not think they bring that enough like value. And that's not to say that doesn't devalue them. They're still amazing commentators. But I don't think numbers should be the biggest driving force because there are some commentators out there who are incredible, especially some of these young Valorant ones. Simo is one I mention a lot. He is incredibly good, yet he doesn't have maybe as much experience, but he deserves to be on a VCT broadcast. He deserves to be on the Riot official events. I don't think he worked the North American main event fully, but like these kind of people should be at the top of it because they've got the right passion and drive for it. And I guess that just comes down more to the bad hiring process and how things work. But I'd say in Valorant, the only downside is that at the beginning, like what NA had lots more money, they had all the talent, and then for EU, even people like even me and Mitch were getting sick of just being me and Mitch. Like we would have killed to not do 4 best of 3s a day,
Yes.
and we had another duo, but the budget wasn't there. Like I think it was WePlay and Blast who did the 2 best events, and that's again okay. These guys hire me, but it's like they did the best events because we had talent rotation. We had time off. We were able to actually do a broadcast without killing ourselves the whole day. And those things make a big difference. And I didn't know. I still don't understand why EU was so heavily undervalued in that sense. I'm guessing it's just because the numbers are not there yet, and we need the numbers to get there. I actually might even do this statistic now myself and see if big commentators commentate a game, how much the viewership increases. Because one thing we do know is players drive incredible viewership,
Yes.
right? When Na'Vi plays, the last 3 big online breaking records are all a Na'Vi game versus someone else. It was like Na'Vi Astralis, Na'Vi Complexity, Na'Vi Vitality, for example. Funny thing there, the CIS community is really huge and they're all watching the games, because they like Na'Vi and they like Simple and all this side of it. And they, I think, bring in more of the numbers than it does on the talent side. You obviously still need a very experienced talent. Like, I'm never going to suggest getting rid of Anders and Semler because those two are absolutely incredible. But I don't think that, say, they pick a commentator with, oh, he's good, and so is this guy good. And if they're even like this and they go, oh, but he has 10,000 followers and he has 2,000. To me, that's where you need to say, okay, which one's going to add more value to the broadcast? What's going to be better at their job? And I also think a lot of people hiring don't exactly know what's better for the broadcast, or they maybe not have an idea in the head of what is better. They have their opinion, sure, but where's the data? Where's the understanding of what actually is better?
That understanding as well. So you're talking about making sure that you're not using the Twitter followers or the social media presence as like
Yeah,
the metric by which you judge the impact that it will have on the broadcast. It's an
exactly.
interesting connection to my next question, because one of the issues that's been touted outside of it's more like broad spectrum in terms of esports. Like, it could be journalism, it could be broadcast talent, but there's
Mhm.
the idea of gatekeeping. There's the idea of like the old guard coming in and they have their own say. And you've had your own run-ins with this sort of concept before. Obviously, famously, you had the incident where you discussed ReDeYe and in your
Yep.
confrontations with him and your experience with him, and that's been
And people thought I was the bad guy as well. Like I'm the one doing the bad stuff when you literally got someone physically abusing people, and we brush over something like that, right? Where, and this is the bit that gets me, because I'm the one with the less followers and I speak out about it. I felt like I needed to speak about it, whether you like the fact I had to bring his family into it or not. This is something that happened. Yeah, this is a guy who basically threatened my entire career, and I don't have education. I don't have like a huge family that have loads of money and success. Like, I'm completely on my own in what I do. I took a big risk on it because I thought it was needed. Because this guy was literally contacting me and saying and threatening my livelihood, which would mean I can't feed my son. Yeah, I can't support my family. And sadly, he did a load of bad stuff, and I brought it to light. If people, like, I'm really lucky that tournament organizers don't not hire me now because of it. Like, I spoke to majority of them, and everyone's fine. The overall bad side of it was just the community backlash from it, I guess. But if this was, say, a footballer or a basketball player or something, yeah, if they do something that goes bad in the paper, everyone scrutinizes them, everyone goes crazy. Why should we be hiding people that do all this bad stuff when so many people knew what ReDeYe was doing? Like, I even had some tournament organizers, and obviously I'm not going to mention it, which names they are. They were saying, "Oh, thank you for finally speaking up on this," because these people have just been watching it go on, and I'm like, how is this fine? And so many people were like, "Oh, you're a scumbag," and like even colleagues of mine now just don't talk to me because, or so old colleagues of mine, I guess, don't talk to me because of this. And I'm sat there thinking, so if this happened to you, yeah, you would just allow it, like you'd be completely fine with it. But I'm so bad because I brought someone's family into it when he literally was bringing my family into it and saying that I wouldn't have a career and trying to use his power. So, like, I don't understand the logic behind it. Like, I don't want someone who's a sexual predator or someone who's a physical abuser to be in our industry and getting away with it. They shouldn't be in it. And sadly, he was a physical abuser. The guy even came forward after to say it was him that he'd been punching and stuff. So the world is so messed up like that, and people are too quickly to protect the, like you said, the old guard, but I say it's in their cliques. There's a lot of these cliques where people sit in. And do you know what was amazing? And do you know what, I would do a Dota event at the click of a finger anytime soon, because I came into the Dota community. First of all, the community were nice to me, but also all the talent were nice to me because, okay, maybe some of them were friends with ReDeYe, or maybe some of them worked alongside him. But you know what? They knew that, like, I wasn't a scumbag human being. Like, I was just being honest. And some people, I tweeted about this the other day. Some people don't like the truth. Some people don't like honesty, and they'll do anything to turn it against you. And if these people don't want to talk to me anymore, they don't want to be my friend, cool, that's fine. I don't need you as my friends. Like, I've been self-sufficient, and where I come from, you have no choice to be self-sufficient. But I'm also going to protect my family at all costs. I'm also going to protect my career at all costs. And I took a risk because I felt like it was needed so other people weren't being damaged. And it's absolutely ridiculous that Code Red is even able to still run as a business. Like, it's a joke that people are still even employed by them as like they're the agents of them and stuff. Like, how are you able to do this and people just let them get away with it? And that's one thing that should definitely change in the industry, is like accountability for stuff. 100%.
Well, one of the connections here too is that you also touched on briefly the whole the sort of like the gaming centric, esports centric Me Too thing that came out, right, where a lot of
Hmm.
people were caught out or put on blast for their sexual abuse as well. So it wasn't just like the physical side of things. Obviously, ReDeYe is a more specific example, but
Yep.
the other cases as well kind of cleaned house in a way. And I feel like from an outsider's perspective, and you can feel free to step in and let me know where maybe I have something wrong here, but the silver lining of like, despite the community's tendency to overreact or to maybe shoot the messenger when it comes to bad news about somebody that they like or that they idolize, is at the very least that tendency to have the old guard or the cliques, as you mentioned, control a lot of things, be they intimidation or be they simply not allowing the hiring. That practice seems to have died down from the outside. Is that entirely accurate? Do you think that that's still going on at the top level and it just hasn't been exposed, or have they at least made it so like it sounds kind of goofy to say at least, but have they at least stopped like the more abusive side of things? Is it now just down to the industry politics side of things? What's your take on how things have changed since that whole both of these events, the Me Too side of things, but also the ReDeYe posts and how that unfolded? Has that changed anything?
So I would say on the whole movement side of things, and the one thing I wish I just waited and released my stuff after the movement. But like, I guess I was kind of inspired by other people doing stuff and thinking, okay, this is the time. And directly his was not related to it, but it just kind of all came together. So
Yes.
that's on my part. Like, I'm always happy to admit where I'm wrong. And people said like about bringing his family into it. Okay, I didn't want to bring his family into it, but I was proposed a piece of evidence of court thing, and I put it in there when a guy was literally threatening my life. Like, no one understands the conversation where this guy's calling me, calling me off a number I didn't know, like, was and giving me abuse and telling me like if I release any information about him, he's gonna make sure that I never work in the industry again and I won't be able to. Like, he was just mentally bullying me, and everyone just glosses over the information in that side of things. But when you're talking about industry politics like that, I think maybe in some aspects people have got better, but people are hiring like I don't know what you call them, but like community activists or whatever, where it's like making that nicer for them or whatever. They try to put a fancy title on it. But the bit that really gets me is that there's people, tournament organizers have told me, sorry, like there are people that basically said that they won't work a broadcast with because you're on it now because they were friends with ReDeYe. So like I've lost work because of it, but I've also gained work. Like I got an email from another tournament organizer that said, "Oh, we're really happy to work with you. This guy had also caused us problems." Like there was a tournament organizer where they had to fire or remove their makeup artist because ReDeYe had like abused her so much and screamed at her and been horrible. And this tournament organizer then came to me and was like, "Oh, we're so glad you spoke out about it. Like he's been a pain for us, but we've always felt like we had to hire him." So it's like there's so many messed up stories of this. And the fact that like people I consider I was cool with in CS and like I'd done many events with turn around and say like, "Oh, they don't want to work an event because I'm hired." Okay, fair enough. That's your choice. But like, that's messed up on its own. Like, that shouldn't be a thing when out of it, it's just because they're friends with someone and they may not necessarily agree with what he's done, but they didn't want the drama or the stuff popping out about it. But we need to make changes if we want this industry to be better across the thing. Like, I come from a heavy multicultural background, right? Like, where I went to school, I was one of the few white kids in the school. And my stepdad is Jamaican. My family is obviously a whole mix of things. Like, we're every bit of everything out there. And for me, any sort of racism, sexism, like stuff like that, I don't even see it. It shouldn't be there. It's again, I just come back to it should be you're good at your job and this is why you're hired or whatever. So for me, it's a bit of an up and down with it. For how the industry has changed, I wouldn't say it's changed massively. Maybe some people pretend like it has on the outside, but I think you kind of see it, right? The people who really did get hurt by this stuff and did a lot of wrong, they're obviously not being hired, and rightly so. But like, there's a lot of people that probably got away with it. But also, I can also flip on the other side where there are people who did 100% nothing wrong, and their name got pulled into it, like someone like Launders, and it was almost borderline lies and things that went out there, and that could nearly end his whole career. So there is a flip side with it, but people are so scared to look at what the actual truth is or make their own opinion. They'll listen to one podcast, and Foreign, for example, he was on the By the Numbers podcast. They obviously mentioned my ReDeYe stuff. And I had to message him on WhatsApp afterwards and say, "You basically misquoted me, but obviously now that's stuck on the video the whole time.
Yeah.
This isn't really fair." Because they just took something they thought they remembered or part of it they remembered and then just left out part of the story. So like, I just look like the bad guy, for example. I said, that's where it's not acceptable. Like, if you read all the documents and everything I went through, then maybe you make your own educated opinion from it. But people don't do that anymore. They just take what they first read and go with it. Like, how many people at the beginning hated Henry for the stories that came out between him and his ex, and yet in the end his name was pretty much cleared, right? There were obviously some bad things or how it went down the relationship. I don't care to get into the details, but everyone at the beginning was setting him on fire, and then afterwards when more came out, and it's like, this is where people need to calm down, relax, and read it all. Like, it's people's inability to be human, and that's what gets me most. Like, I am super honest. I have been a horrible cunt of a person for a lot of my childhood. Like I literally was selling drugs, and I changed my life through this esports stuff. And okay, I'm not perfect, and I definitely maybe at times don't fit in with the esports click crowd or whatever it is. But you ask anyone who's like directly worked with me or who I've hosted with, is that I'll always go the extra mile. I'm always working hard. I'm always nice. I'm always honest, and that's not like an act. That's literally what it is. But if someone's being bad, I'll call them out on it. If something's not acceptable, I'll say it. And I think we need more of that. And sadly, it will cost you some jobs. It will cost you a bit of pain. It will cause you a bit of pain, should I say? But that is just the nature of the world. And as esports grows, I'm hoping we just clear out more of the rubbish, right? Kick it to the curb.
So one of the things that you are referencing pretty heavily throughout all of these segments is that you're looking for a meritocracy out of esports. You're looking for the best of the best to be the ones who are picked, and leave all
Yeah.
the politics aside, leave your personal biases aside, and just do what you think is best for the broadcast, irrespective
Mhm.
of any personal disagreements or differences. With the exception of some majors in CS, I haven't seen that approach taken by pretty much anybody. And even in the
I
majors, I feel
know.
like they still kind of get away with a couple of corners cut or maybe decisions that are fueled a little bit more by bias. And that's obviously my uninformed sort of speculation on the subject.
Mhm.
But if you had to guess, like if you could see a roadmap or a path to getting us closer as esports, CS, Valorant, anything like that, towards that meritocratic goal where everybody is selected but based on the caliber of work that they can provide for the
Yep.
broadcast and the synergy that they have, or what they bring to the actual product. Where do you think we go? How do you think we get there? What are the next couple steps that we could do, or some things that we could change about the hiring process or the way that these TOs are organizing their events that would in general level up the quality of the product while
Mm.
also removing that unfair aspect of where you are just playing industry politics?
Technically, I've got a good example for you here on what you're saying, and this is, I think, is a lesson that many people can learn. Semler, one of the greatest to have ever done it in Counter Strike, got to a point where he didn't want to do it anymore. Right? He knew he was losing the passion, and he went to Overwatch. And people make the memes and stuff about it, or whatever else they want to do. He made a decision that would benefit him and his career going forward, and it didn't. He didn't want to hinder a broadcast anymore. Yeah, if he was not feeling so good about the CS, then he comes back to CS a couple of years later and he sounds incredible. He's enjoying it again. You're seeing him streaming and doing his research, right? Today he was on his stream looking at lineups and setups and stuff that the teams are using. He revitalized himself, as it would be. We've seen too many people who have been long standing not sound good anymore, not maybe enjoy it anymore. And if that's the case, okay, you need to make money. I understand it. But maybe you need to look at being the hardest worker in the room. And I take that from The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. Like I'm obsessed with him. A big old wrestling kid I am. Hardest worker in the room is something that should be applied to it, because right now when I go into it, I see Scrawny, I see Launders, I see them getting there ready, doing their VOD review and stuff. I see Anders, I see Sembler, they're checking things. Anders is sat there on Skybox geeking out and looking at all the new things that are coming up. Sembler's having a look as well, seeing what the team's like. That doesn't matter about their age. It doesn't matter about the difference in followers between those guys. Those are four commentators, yeah, two different duos who both bring a huge amount of experience, but they love what they do. Like for me, I would happily, if someone comes to me tomorrow and they're like, "Oh, Shox is replacing you on Blast as the host, and you're back to the interview role, or you're not hired at all," I'd be like, "Shit, that's pretty fucked up." But she deserves it because she came and did the hosting for Blast London, and she even admitted, "I don't fully know the game in all the details, but she came prepared. She sounded good, and it was really good." So you'd have to take that one on the chin, you know? If someone came, and I don't know, I'll just use, if they came and said Mitch, who's never hosted in his life, by the way, and they went, "Mitch is replacing you," I'd go, "What the fuck? Like, he's my boy, but where's the logic in this?" You know, obviously sometimes it's not as cut or dry. Sometimes it can be close, and then relationships and bias like that can come into it, for example. But there are some lines that are very grayed out here, and I've definitely benefited before. Like for example, we played. They're based in Kiev, and I basically help put together like project consultant for their fighting game events, which is obviously a big passion of mine. But because I live in Kiev, they hire me for a lot of their CS events. I probably wouldn't just be their first choice on hosting if I didn't live in Kiev. You know, they'd probably get some other people maybe. So it's like I benefited from the same thing I'm not too happy with. And sometimes you can be benefited from it because it's just easier for that person, right? Someone who's making that decision. Um, there's no real fix for it, but I just wish there was like I wish it was a bit clearer when it really should be. Like you, for instance, say the majors. I always like the thing you can praise StarLadder for is they used a lot of talent who had never done majors for the minors running up into it, and then even brought Hugo and Harry on, I believe, for one part of the actual major part, and they'd never done a major. That's huge. But like I would hope, considering, so say Blast got a major, I damn well hope they would 100% have me, Scrawny, Launders, Pimp, Maniac, because Pimp's done a major, Maniac hasn't. I've done a major, but like Scrawny and Launders haven't, and they would all deserve it. And I would say ESL, right? Hugo and Harry are used on pretty much all ESL events. So that means if ESL do another major, I bloody hope they're going to hire him. I don't care if that means like someone else doesn't get it who people think should get it. Like those guys have grinded, they've been dedicated to it, you know, and that's where we do see some deserving from it. But also fans think like these comments, they make a lot of bad comments on talent announcements or updates, and they're like, I don't like this guy. I don't like some people I listen to commentating. I listen to some commentators and I'm like, oh, this is really bad. But you know what? That's me. There's probably lots of people that think they're great. And it's a personal opinion on it as well. And there's no level of measurement. So this is where it gets so confusing. Like to understand every little detail on how that pick would go, like you could be here for years trying to work out. It'd be like solving I don't know, what's the secret to life or something, you know?
So it's definitely a tough question, which I
Yeah,
recognize.
I don't even have the answer, and I want to have the answer, you know?
Well, one of the things that I know you'll have the answer to is we're coming towards the closing of the interview, and I wanted to cycle back to
Okay.
when I was discussing earlier about how you have that drive to learn a lot of new things, but something you mentioned at the beginning is that you think that you can improve as a desk host, and you think that the three of you for Blast can improve as a just in general as an analyst desk to bring a better product. Obviously, you've also covered that you and Mitch have your strengths and weaknesses, and you want to try to improve as commentators. And
Yep.
you mentioned when you were breaking down your role as a team manager that that's like a new and exciting thing for you.
Oh
How
god, yeah.
obviously you had some experience like IGLing and stuff, but it's a completely different ball game once you're into the team manager role. So if you could give us a little bit of where you think you'll be by the end of this year if everything goes well, what things do you think are you targeting for improvement? What are you looking to do? Maybe like maintain, maybe do something that's not working a little less, do something that you want to do more, anything like that for all three of these things that you're currently finding yourself in, when it's commentating Valorant or hosting for CS or obviously managing the Alliance. What's the James Banks path from here on out for 2021?
So this will be an interesting one. Stunner Trace, he's the main host for ESL now. Machine's gone to commentary. He's really good, but I would say like me and him, very different in style, but we're at the same kind of level. You know, like on the rise, putting that time in. So for me, it would be like I like competition, and it's friendly competition. It's not like fuck you, I want to take your jobs. It's more like I want to be seeing myself as a better host than he is. You know, I want to see myself in that spot where it's like I'm to that Machine Shocks level. That's where I'd like to be. To do that, I need to really refine in on my like time I take sometimes at the beginning, and when you make a throw and stuff. Like sometimes I can condense words. I also want to increase my vocabulary by reading more. Like I'm not well educated at all. I'm dumb as fuck. Like I've no school background or anything, but at least I'm smart in the world, I guess.
Yes.
But I'd love to be able to increase my vocabulary and make things sound a bit better. You know, that's the one thing Machine and Shocks do perfectly. They have such a wide range of choices of words they can make with it. In terms of like being a commentator with Mitch, I just want to make that synergy and that duo work enough that Riot pick us up for maybe the next stage of VCT or the stage after. Like I want to have done one Riot official event sometime throughout 2021. I want to be one, if not the best. I want to be up there with like the Machine and Shocks of hosting. And for my team, I don't care about me as a general manager as long as my team are happy. Like I want my team to feel supported, and I also know that if I can't put the time in needed, then I will make sure that I don't take this role any further. Like I've done my job in building the team, and now it's about finding the balance and alongside all of it. Like I'll definitely probably do some less events. Like I won't do as many as the smaller jobs that come up because I will have my focus on Alliance, and that's how I plan to split it. As like focus on the big tier one events, and then have Alliance and do all my Valorant stuff. You know. Um, but I want to not just see the team. I don't like trophies. I want trophies. You know, everyone wants trophies. I want to get the big wins, but I want to see the team feel like they are well supported and that they have someone they can trust, and that someone who isn't just a team member manager, you know, who is someone they can come to, like the guys talking to me about the fitness advice and like what they want to improve on personally. And that's another thing. Like I want to be not a friend, but a guy who's there who can give some guidance to these younger guys with it as well. I think that's probably good for 2021.
All
And
right.
obviously, definitely want to keep I want to see my son. I haven't seen him for a year now because of COVID. Like we're completely split apart, but he understands. We got FaceTime, and I definitely want to make sure that I never lose sight of my fiance, who's always supported me, even when things are super bad. Like when I get stressed at work for all this ReDeYe stuff and things, I want her to know that I'm never going to lose sight of her, because that her and my son are probably the most important. But without them, all of this doesn't work. I have to feel good in that. So I just want it to feel like she knows how important she is as well with it all to even make this happen. And that'll be a pretty good 2021, I think. As long as we get rid of COVID, that'd be good if vaccines just roll out worldwide.
Yeah, we get back to lands, the promised land, so to speak.
Lands and all that, arenas would be nice.
Yeah. All right. So I guess that brings us nicely to the final closing words. If you have any shout outs, or if you wanted to say any last words before we close things out here, floor is yours for that.
I guess I know I'm not everyone's cup of tea. I'm very outspoken. They do call me the Tom Hardy of esports for a reason in that. I hope that anyone that does like my work just appreciates everything that's going on, because I appreciate your support. I appreciate the kind words and people tweeting at me. For all the people that give me all the bad words, have fun. You keep throwing it at the wall if you want. It's always going to happen with it. I'm just very thankful to be in a position where I've been able to change my life through doing all of this stuff, and not just changing my life, but my family's life around me in a way I never thought was possible, just from being involved in video games. I absolutely love esports and everything that it's become, and I only want it to become better and stronger as this whole thing grows. And like we were talking about earlier, mate, I hope we don't lose the identity of what esports is, and I hope for its continued growth in the good way with the right people.